I overheard my sister say, "I don't want that loser at Christmas." She had no idea I was standing right outside the kitchen, holding a grocery bag filled with everything I needed to bake Mom's favorite apple pie. She also had no idea my mother was carrying a secret that would change the way everyone in our family looked at me forever. I stood in the hallway, completely still. My hand tightened around the paper bag as I listened to every word. For a second, I thought about walking back to my car and driving away. It would have been easier than hearing what came next. Harlow kept talking. "I don't even know why Mom keeps inviting her," she said. "She's going to ruin the Christmas photos again. Every year it's the same. She's just a loser." Someone laughed softly, and my chest felt heavy. Then she started listing everything that was wrong with my life. I lived in a small apartment. I worked a job nobody wanted to talk about. I got divorced 3 years ago, and according to her, I had probably caused that too. She said I always looked tired. She said I disappeared whenever life became difficult. She even wondered if I was embarrassed to be part of this family. Every sentence hurt, but I stayed where I was. The truth was, Harlow only knew the parts of my life that everyone could see. She had no idea what had happened after my marriage ended. She didn't know why I had walked away from almost everyone I loved. She didn't know why I stopped explaining myself. I carefully placed the grocery bag on the small table by the front door before anything inside could fall out. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. Part of me wanted to leave without saying a word. Another part wanted to walk into that kitchen and tell everyone exactly how wrong they were. Instead, I picked up the bag again, wiped the sadness from my face, and forced a small smile. If they expected me to arrive angry, I wouldn't give them that. I stepped toward the kitchen as if I hadn't heard a single word. What I didn't know was that my mother had been listening too. And before Christmas dinner was over, she was going to tell the truth that would leave the entire room silent and make every person at that table question everything they believed about me. As I stood there pretending everything was normal, I couldn't blame anyone for believing the worst about me. From the outside, my life really did look like one long series of bad choices. 3 years earlier, my marriage to Grant Whitfield had fallen apart in front of everyone we knew. It wasn't a quiet divorce. Friends picked sides. Family members whispered behind closed doors. Every gathering seemed to include someone asking what had happened, followed by someone else claiming they already knew the answer. Most of what they believed wasn't true, but I never tried to correct them. The rumors spread quickly. People said I drank too much. They said I couldn't handle responsibility. They said Grant had finally reached his limit and walked away because I had become impossible to live with. Then came my cousin's wedding. That day became the story everyone remembered. By the end of the night, people weren't talking about the bride or the groom. They were talking about me. Nobody cared what had led to that moment. They only remembered that I left early, looking like a complete mess. From then on, every family gathering carried that memory with it. After the divorce, I slowly disappeared. I skipped the first Thanksgiving because I couldn't face everyone's questions. The next year I stayed away again because I knew the questions would only be worse. When Dad retired, I didn't attend his party either. I mailed him a gift and wrote a short letter. It wasn't enough, but I couldn't bring myself to walk into a room where I knew every conversation would stop the moment I arrived. Whenever someone called, I kept my answers short. "I'm okay. I just need some space. I'll come next time." Next time never came. While I pulled away from everyone, Harlow stayed close. She helped Mom with shopping, drove her to appointments, fixed things around the house, and handled the family dinners I used to help organize. From her point of view, I had simply disappeared and left everyone else to deal with the responsibilities. She never saw the nights I couldn't sleep or the mornings I struggled just to get out of bed. All she saw was a sister who walked away without an explanation. Looking back, I understand why she believed I had given up on my family. If I had only known my life from a distance, I might have believed the same thing too. Before my life fell apart, I managed marketing campaigns for a large company. My days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and business trips. I wore expensive clothes, carried a laptop everywhere, and believed I had everything under control. None of that was true anymore. Now my mornings started before sunrise. I cleaned kitchens, scrubbed bathrooms, changed bed sheets, and vacuumed living rooms that belonged to people who barely knew my name. In the afternoons, I worked part-time caring for elderly people who could no longer manage on their own. I helped them cook simple meals, reminded them to take their medicine, folded their laundry, and stayed with them so they wouldn't spend the day alone. It wasn't the career I had imagined for myself, but it was honest work, and every paycheck helped me keep moving forward. Months before Christmas, our family had gathered for lunch at my aunt's house. I almost didn't go, but Mom convinced me to come for at least an hour. Everything was fine until my Aunt Denise smiled across the table and asked, "So, Ren, what are you doing these days?" The room became strangely quiet. Before I could answer, Mom picked up her glass and started asking Aunt Denise about her new garden. Within seconds, everyone was discussing flowers, weather, and weekend plans. No one came back to the question. I noticed Harlow watching the whole exchange. She looked at Mom, then at me, before lowering her eyes to her plate. She probably thought Mom was embarrassed by my answer. I never corrected that idea. The truth felt too complicated to explain over lunch. I didn't want people feeling sorry for me. I didn't want them comparing the woman I used to be with the one sitting in front of them now, so I smiled, finished my meal, and let everyone think whatever they wanted. Silence became easier than telling the whole story. Looking back, that silence gave people permission to create their own version of my life. Around that same time, Mom started disappearing every Sunday. She always said she had errands to run. If Harlow asked where she was going, Mom would simply smile and say, "I'll be back before dinner." She never offered another detail. Sometimes she returned carrying nothing at all. Other times she looked tired, as if she had spent hours doing something important. No one pushed for answers. We all accepted the same simple explanation every week. Only much later did I realize those quiet Sundays mattered more than anyone in the family could have imagined. Later, Harlow told me she had started noticing little things about Mom long before that Christmas dinner. At first, they seemed too small to matter. Every Sunday, Mom had somewhere to be. She turned down family lunches without much explanation. If Harlow invited her shopping, Mom would say she already had plans. When neighbors asked if she wanted to join them for coffee after church, she always smiled politely and said she couldn't stay. It happened so often that everyone stopped asking. Harlow didn't. She began calling Mom on Sunday afternoons, but most of the time the calls went unanswered. A few hours later, Mom would call back, saying she had been busy. Busy doing what? The answer never changed. Just taking care of a few things. That only made Harlow more suspicious. She started watching for other clues. Sometimes Mom came home looking exhausted, as though she had spent the entire day on her feet. On a few evenings, her eyes looked red, like she had been crying or had barely slept the night before. Harlow asked if she needed to see a doctor. Mom laughed softly and said she was fine. She asked if something was wrong. Mom said no. She asked if she was keeping a secret from the family. Mom only squeezed her hand and changed the subject. That bothered Harlow more than any answer could have. She told Tucker one evening that she was tired of everyone pretending everything was okay. First it had been my silence after the divorce. Now Mom was hiding something too. "Why can't anyone just tell the truth?" she said. Tucker tried to calm her down, saying maybe Mom simply wanted some privacy. Harlow wasn't convinced. One Sunday, after leaving church, she happened to drive through another part of town. As she waited at a traffic light, she noticed Mom's car a short distance ahead. Without thinking much about it, she followed. Mom drove quietly through a few side streets before pulling into the parking lot of a modest apartment building. It wasn't a place anyone in our family had ever mentioned. Harlow stayed back and watched from across the street. Mom turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. She looked into the rearview mirror, smoothed her hair, wiped under one eye, and took a long breath. Then she stepped out, walked slowly to the entrance, and knocked on one of the apartment doors. The door opened. From where Harlow sat, she couldn't see who was inside. A second later, the door closed behind Mom, leaving Harlow with more questions than answers. Christmas Eve finally arrived, and by late afternoon the house was full of familiar voices. Coats covered the hallway bench, children ran from room to room, and the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled every corner of the house. Harlow moved through the kitchen helping set the table while chatting quietly with Tucker. She glanced toward the front window every few minutes, waiting to see if I would actually come. When she noticed my car pulling into the driveway, she let out a quiet sigh. "I still can't believe Mom keeps inviting her," she whispered. Tucker didn't answer right away. He simply picked up another stack of plates and carried them into the dining room. A few moments later, I stepped inside the house. I had arrived 15 minutes later than everyone else. The drive had taken longer because I had stopped twice just to calm myself down. I wore a plain green sweater, dark jeans, and an old winter coat that had seen better days. In my hands was the apple pie I had baked the night before. Mom smiled as soon as she saw me. "I'm so glad you made it," she said, taking my coat. I handed her the pie. "I hope it turned out okay." "I'm sure it's perfect," she replied warmly. Across the room, I caught Harlow looking at the pie before looking away. Her expression said enough. She probably thought I was trying too hard to look thoughtful after staying away for so long. I greeted my aunts, uncles, and cousins one by one. Most smiled politely. A few gave me careful hugs. Others seemed unsure what to say, so they asked simple questions about the weather or the drive. No one mentioned the years I had missed. While everyone finished preparing dinner, I began helping in the kitchen without being asked. I chopped vegetables, washed a few dishes, and carried serving bowls to the table. For a little while, everything stayed peaceful. Then Harlow looked at me from across the counter. "So," she asked loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "are you still doing that cleaning job?" The room grew quieter. Aunt Denise stopped wrapping silverware. One of my cousins looked down at his phone. I knew exactly what Harlow was doing. She wasn't asking because she cared. She wanted everyone to hear my answer. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm still working." She nodded with a small smile that never reached her eyes. "I guess someone's got to do it." Nobody laughed. I picked up another serving dish and carried it to the dining room without saying another word. Behind me, conversations slowly started again, but they sounded forced. When I returned to the kitchen, I noticed Mom standing near the stove. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Harlow. Her hands were perfectly still, but the muscles along her jaw had tightened. She said nothing, not yet. I had seen that look before. It was the expression she wore when she had reached the end of her patience and was holding back words that could not stay hidden much longer. Dinner ended more quietly than it had begun. People cleared the table, and the children hurried into the living room to look at the presents stacked under the Christmas tree. The adults stayed behind, pouring coffee while Mom cut slices of pie. For a few minutes, the conversation drifted toward ordinary things. My uncle talked about work. Aunt Denise asked Tucker about the wedding plans. Someone turned on soft Christmas music in the next room. It almost felt like a normal family gathering. Then Patricia, a longtime family friend who had known us since we were children, smiled at Mom. "Eleanor," she said, "I almost stopped to say hello when I saw you on Course Street last Sunday." Mom looked up from the dessert plates. "Oh?" Patricia nodded. "I figured you were visiting Ren, so I didn't want to interrupt." I froze. Before I could say anything, Harlow looked from Patricia to me. "Course Street?" she asked. "That can't be right." Patricia frowned. "Why not?" "Because Ren doesn't live anywhere near Course Street." Several people turned their heads toward us. Patricia blinked, clearly confused. I could have sworn that's where she lived. Harlow shook her head. "No. Her apartment is on the other side of town." Patricia looked back at Mom. "I'm certain it was that brick building near the old pharmacy. I've seen your car there more than once." The room became strangely still. Even the music from the living room seemed far away. Nobody reached for another piece of pie. Nobody spoke. Harlow's eyes stayed on Mom. "If Ren doesn't live there," she asked slowly, "then why were you there?" Mom didn't answer. She quietly placed the pie server onto the plate in front of her. Patricia looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just assumed everyone already knew." "Knew what?" one of my uncles asked. Patricia hesitated. "I only meant, I've seen Eleanor there several Sundays. That's all." The silence grew heavier. I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, staring at the table. Harlow's expression changed. The confidence she had carried all evening faded into confusion. She looked at me as if searching my face for an answer I wasn't giving. Then she looked back at Mom. "You've been going there every week?" Mom remained calm. "I have. For 2 years?" Mom gave a small nod. Nobody understood what they were hearing. The simple story everyone believed, that I had walked away while Mom stayed home picking up the pieces, no longer fit together. For the first time that night, people stopped looking at me as though I was the center of the problem. Instead, every eye in the room settled on my mother, waiting for the explanation she had kept hidden for so long. The questions hanging over the table didn't disappear. They only grew heavier. Harlow looked at me, waiting for me to explain what Mom would not. "So tell us," she said. "What's really going on?" Her voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it. I looked down at my coffee before answering. "There isn't some big secret." "It doesn't feel that way," Harlow replied. "Nobody knows why Mom has been going to that building every week." I let out a slow breath. That apartment is where I lived after Grant and I separated. A few relatives exchanged surprised looks. They had never known the address because I had never invited anyone there. "It was the only place I could afford," I continued. "It wasn't much, but it gave me a place to start over." The words came slowly. I wasn't used to talking about those years. After the divorce, I had to rebuild everything. I had no plan. I just took one day at a time. I paused for a moment. I stopped drinking. I found work. I made myself follow a routine every single day, even when I didn't feel like getting out of bed. No one interrupted. I wasn't hiding because I didn't care about the family. I was trying to become someone who could face all of you again. Harlow folded her arms. Then why didn't you just say that? I didn't think anyone wanted to hear it. The answer surprised even me. For years, I had carried those words inside without realizing how true they were. Harlow shook her head. Fine. Maybe I understand some of that. She pointed gently toward Mom. But that still doesn't explain her. The room became quiet again. Why has Mom been going there every Sunday for 2 years? Harlow asked. Why keep it from everyone? Why make it look like she's hiding something? I looked toward Mom. She met my eyes for a brief moment, and I knew exactly what she was thinking. I gave the smallest shake of my head. I didn't want her to say anything. I had spent years protecting my private struggles. I wasn't ready for them to become family conversation. Mom looked back at Harlow instead. Her face was calm, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there earlier that evening. Without saying a word, she pushed her chair back. The leg scraped sharply across the wooden floor, breaking the silence. Every conversation stopped. She stood slowly, looked around the table, and drew a careful breath. At last, she was ready to tell the truth. Mom rested both hands on the back of her chair before she spoke. She looked around the table, making sure everyone was listening. I didn't go to that apartment because Ren needed someone to rescue her, she said quietly. I went because she never asked anyone for help. Nobody moved. When she left her marriage, she didn't come to me asking for money. She didn't ask me to fix her life. She found a tiny apartment and started over with almost nothing. Mom's eyes filled with tears. The first time I visited, there was only a mattress on the floor. No sofa. No table. No pictures on the walls. She made coffee for us using one mug because she only owned one. I closed my eyes. Those memories had never belonged in this room. Every week after that, Mom continued, I watched small changes happen. One Sunday there was a second chair. A month later she had bought a little bookshelf, then a used kitchen table. Nothing came easily. Everything was paid for one paycheck at a time. She looked at Harlow. You thought she disappeared because she didn't care about us. Mom slowly shook her head. She disappeared because every bit of her energy was going into staying alive. The room was completely silent. She fought addiction without asking this family to carry her. She fought depression when some mornings she could barely stand. She worked jobs that people looked down on because honest work was better than giving up. My throat tightened. Mom knew every part of that journey because she had seen it with her own eyes. I've watched her celebrate another month of being sober, she said. Those little coins she keeps in a drawer mean more to her than any award she ever received. She wiped a tear from her cheek. She never showed them to anyone because she wasn't looking for praise. Mom turned fully toward Harlow. You called your sister a loser. Her voice broke. The woman you didn't want sitting at this Christmas table has spent the last 3 years doing the hardest thing I have ever seen. She rebuilt herself without blaming anyone, without asking for attention, and without expecting applause. No one spoke. You saw silence and decided it meant failure, Mom whispered. I saw courage. The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I looked around the table. Every face was frozen. Some relatives stared at their plates. Others looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. Harlow didn't say a single word. The color slowly drained from her face as she finally understood who I had really been all along. Nobody rushed to fill the silence after Mom finished speaking. The room stayed still, as if everyone needed time to understand what they had just heard. Harlow looked at me, then down at her hands. She began, but the words stopped. She tried again. I'm sorry. Her voice shook in a way I had never heard before. I didn't know. I believed her. She hadn't known. She had built her opinion from pieces that never showed the whole picture. I could see tears gathering in her eyes, but I didn't want this moment to become about making her feel worse. You weren't the only one, I said quietly. Several people looked at me. I gave everyone the same story. I said I needed space, and then I disappeared. I folded my hands together. The truth is, I thought I deserved what people were saying. The words surprised a few relatives. When everything fell apart, I blamed myself for all of it. Every rumor, every whisper, every judgment felt like something I had earned. After a while, correcting people didn't seem important anymore. Nobody interrupted. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough and worked hard enough, maybe one day my life would speak for itself. Across the table, Aunt Denise slowly removed her glasses and wiped her eyes. One of my cousins stared at the floor without saying a word. Even a family friend who had known Grant for years looked uncomfortable, as though remembering conversations he wished he could take back. No one tried to defend themselves. They didn't need to. Their faces said enough. For years, they had accepted the easiest explanation because it required the least effort. It was simpler to believe I had failed than to wonder if I had been fighting a battle they couldn't see. Harlow finally looked up again. I said terrible things about you. You did. I can't take them back. No. Another long silence passed between us. Then she took a slow breath. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I know. She gave a small nod. After a moment, she asked something so quietly that I almost didn't hear it. Would you let me see your apartment someday? Not because she wanted to inspect it. Not because she doubted me anymore. She wanted to understand the place where I had started over. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. A few hours earlier, I would have said no. Now, for the first time in years, it felt possible that we could stop living as strangers who happened to share the same last name. I gave her a small smile. When you're ready, I said, you can come. Spring arrived before Harlow finally visited my apartment. She stood outside my door for a few seconds before knocking. When I opened it, she smiled nervously, holding a small plant in her hands. I didn't know if you liked flowers, she said. I do. I stepped aside and invited her in. The apartment looked different from the place Mom had first described to the family. There was a comfortable couch by the window, a bookshelf filled with novels, framed photographs on the walls, and a small dining table where two people could sit and talk for hours. Nothing inside was expensive. Every piece had a story. Harlow looked around quietly, taking everything in without making jokes or asking uncomfortable questions. It's nice, she said softly. Thank you. I made tea, and we sat by the window while rain tapped gently against the glass. For a while, neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, Harlow looked at me. I used to think your silence meant you believed you were better than everyone. I listened without interrupting. You never explained anything. You stayed away. I thought you didn't care enough to be honest with us. I nodded. I understand why you thought that. She looked down at her cup. I was wrong. I smiled sadly. I wasn't making it easy for anyone to understand. She looked back at me. Why didn't you let us help? I thought about the question for a long moment. Because talking about my failures made them feel more real. Staying quiet felt easier than admitting how lost I was. The words hung between us. I wasn't protecting myself, I continued. I was hiding from people who loved me because I didn't know how to let them see me at my lowest. Harlow reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. Neither of us cried. We didn't need to. Some things heal quietly. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me before walking to her car. It wasn't a perfect ending. We still had years of hurt to work through. But we had finally started telling each other the truth, and that was something we hadn't done in a very long time. If my story leaves you with one thought, let it be this. Before you decide someone has given up, ask yourself what you cannot see. Some people are fighting battles in silence because they are trying to survive, not because they have stopped caring. The sister who once called me a loser eventually learned that the hardest victories are often the ones nobody ever watches, and sometimes the person everyone looks down on is the one who has been the strongest all along.